Hello everyone, Silent K here, and it's time to review the last batch of cards for Tempest of the Gods. The expansion launches on the 30th of this month, and before we get started on the last batch of cards, I may as well properly review Owlcat. We have to remain professional. So once again, Owlcat, 2 mana 2/1, Clash, destroy the enemy follower if its attack is 1. So like I said before, this instantly kills any follower with 1 attack. So against an aggressive deck, they're going to want it off the board immediately, which basically makes it a 2/2 ward. A 2/2 ward rather than a 2/1 ward because they're going to have to attack into it with a 2 attack follower if they don't have a spell to deal with it. And they obviously don't want it sitting on the board letting you kill their 1 attack followers for free. So essentially a 2/2 ward, which isn't bad value. 2/2 wards do see play, and it does have a slight benefit if it gets to stick on the board. It does have to kill multiple followers for it to actually have above average value, however. If you only kill one attack follower with it, then a 2/2 ward would be a 2/1, which is what you're starting with. So you have to kill at least 2 followers for free for this to be above average value. But overall pretty fair, so we'll give it a 0. For Bloodcraft we have Mask of the Black Death, 2 mana amulet. Whenever your leader takes damage, reduce the damage to 0 and subtract the same amount from this amulet's countdown instead. If you have more than 1 Mask of the Black Death, then it's going to subtract from all of your amulets at once. So you only want 1 on the board at a time. So this card has the same sort of early game anti-aggro applications that cards like Man-Eating Mangrove and Test of Strength would have, but it also has a lot more versatility than that. For starters, keep in mind that any attack is reduced to 0 as long as this amulet is on the board, so it heals for a minimum of 5. If your opponent has 2 4 attack followers on the board and they're forced to attack into your face to get rid of the amulet, this is going to tank 8 damage, which is pretty good. You can of course also use it to combo with self-damage effects to save yourself the damage, especially useful if you're already in Vengeance and you don't want to take that self-damage. Overall, it's versatile, but it's just a basic heal combo card. It's actually not that bad, and it might see some play. So I'm giving it a 0. For Dragoncraft, we have Dragon Slayer's Price, 4 mana spell, discard your hand, then deal 5 damage to all followers. So even if you have a Dracomancer's Rites on the board and you're cycling your hand rather than discarding it, it's still not a very good effect, unless you're promoting a win condition with it. Altered Fate, for example, doesn't see any play outside of Path to Purgatory decks for that reason. Altered Fate being played because it promotes the Path to Purgatory win condition, not because cycling your hand is a good thing. Ding dong! It's also a double-sided effect, so you're burning both sides of the board for 5 damage. So not likely to see play in an average deck. It does have some synergy with gotta use your noggin now and again combo decks. Other than that, not very good. Overall, -1. And on the flip side, we have a 6 mana spell, Lightning Blast. Banish an enemy follower or amulet. Enhance 10. Banish all enemy followers and amulets. So just like the last expansion, Dragoncraft gets both a great single target removal and an enhanced AoE effect. Lightning Blast also directly counters 2 of the best Rise of Bahamut decks, including Nephthys and Seraph. Technically Seraph is a Darkness Evolved deck, but it was still top tier this expansion as well, so. Ramp Dragon already ran Odin, but Lightning Blast is a bit more flexible. It can be played 2 turns earlier, and it can also be used to clean up a swarm like Nephthys with multiple Mordecai on the board. Overall, +2. Onto Forestcraft, Mighty Dwarf, 7 mana, 6/5, Clash, deal 2 damage to the enemy leader. I shouldn't have to spell it out, this card seems pretty terrible. It's got terrible stats, and a pretty weak effect for 7 mana and paying such a high stat price. This is a bronze card all day long, -2. Next, Ivy Spellbomb, 3 mana spell, deal 3 damage to an enemy follower, then deal 2 damage to the enemy leader if at least 2 other cards were played this turn. So basically Piercing Rune with a combo condition. Forestcraft did get a new aggro card, so this might be included in a pure aggro forest deck, but on its own, it's not great value. In order to play this for the full effect, you're probably going to play something like Fairy Ivy Spellbomb, which is a 5 mana play, which typically an aggro deck would just play Dance of Death, and it would deal infinite damage to an enemy follower. and 2 damage to the enemy leader. Overall, -1. For Havencraft, Judge of Retribution, 6 mana, 3/5, Fanfare, banish an enemy follower with 3 defense or less, then draw a card. This card basically combines the stat distribution and the draw a card effect from Radiance Angel and the evolve effect from Priest of the Cudgel into a Fanfare, which is a pretty good set of effects. The main problem is that it's a binary effect on a high cost card. Usually in the mid-late game, you have to deal damage to an enemy follower and then play Blackened Scripture in order to remove it. If you're playing a 6 cost with this Fanfare, you have to already have something on the board to attack into it, otherwise you do not get the Fanfare, and if you do not get the Fanfare, then you do not draw a card either, since the Fanfare will be conditional on being able to target an enemy follower with 3 defense or less. So even though this card looks really good at first, once you actually look at the practical applications, it's not quite as good. Overall, 0. Next, Iron Maiden, 4 mana amulet, countdown 2, at the end of your turn deal 2 damage to a random enemy follower. It can't attack next turn. So this is yet another stall amulet along the lines of Man-Eating Mangrove, Test of Strength, Mask of the Black Death. The main difference being that 1, this card is proactive, it deals damage automatically, and it stops them from attacking, and 2, it's in a class that excels at stalling the game. A card like Iron Maiden could be useful in setting up for Priest of the Cudgel or Themis' Decree on the following turn. You do a little chip damage to a follower, and then it cannot attack, then your opponent plays another follower, and then you evolve your Priest of the Cudgel, clear 2 things at once. The other thing that helps this card score a little bit is that the 4-drop is not competitive at all in Havencraft. There's Priest of the Cudgel, which is auto-include, and then there's Tribunal, which is pretty good, but that's about it. And since you can run a lot of 4-drops, it really doesn't even have to compete with Priest of the Cudgel either. It's just looking at the secondary slot. So this versus Tribunal, it compares pretty favorably. Tribunal has an immediate effect, whereas Iron Maiden is more about setting up for value next turn. It's actually not that bad. Overall, 0. Next, Octo Bishop, 4 mana 3/4. At the end of your turn, restore 3 defense to this follower. I'll just pause for a moment and we can all take in that card art. I feel kinda bad I spent my entire meme budget on lolcat. Anyway, this is pretty much a cheaper Moon Owl Mirage that requires an evo point. You evolve this, trade into something, and then it heals itself, which makes it a bit more difficult for your opponent to deal with. Typically, if you're up against a class that runs 2 or 3 damage spells, they can easily clean up a wounded evolve target. That way they can answer your play without using an evolve point of their own. But if this guy heals up well enough, then they're not going to be able to do that. And like I just said, the 4-drop slot is not very competitive. So considering that, he seems pretty good. Overall, +1. On to Runecraft, Magic Illusionist, 2 mana 2/2. Last words, perform Earthright, summon a Magic Illusionist. So as long as you have a bunch of Earth Sigils on the board, this guy just keeps coming back. Kinda like a faster ultimate carrot. But mostly it's just going to be a waste of Earth Sigils, since you want to save them for better effects. It also allows the opponent to control your Earth Sigil usage to a degree. Typically your opponent can't interact with them because they're amulets, but if they kill this guy a few times, they can wipe your entire board of Earth Sigils. Overall, -1. Next, Mage of Nightfall, 3 mana 3/2. Earthright, gain +1/+1, and Ambush. So my first thought was that this card isn't very good, because much like Magic Illusionist, there are better effects you can use Earth Sigils for. But when you think about it, this is potentially a very aggressive card. If you proc it and evolve it, you have a 6/5 with Ambush for 3 mana, which is pretty powerful. That's more damage than Implancer for half the cost, although it can be stopped by Ward. Overall, 0. Onto Shadowcraft, Prince Catacomb, 3 mana 1/1. Fanfare, give all allied followers last words, summon a skeleton. So effectively very similar to Bone Chimera. Bone Chimera is a 3 mana 1/1 that summons 2 skeletons when it dies, so as long as you have one other follower on the board, you get Bone Chimera value out of this. Although Bone Chimera doesn't really see play, so you're really looking for this card to be better than Bone Chimera. This card can be better with more followers on the board. It's less good if there's nothing on the board. Overall though, you're probably just going to get Bow and Chimera value, and like I said, he doesn't see play, so this probably won't either. Overall, -1. Onto Swordcraft. Jolly Rogers, 6 mana 5/6. Fanfare, randomly gain Rush, Bane, or Ward. This is basically Hearthstone levels of RNG. Randomly gaining Rush on a 6-drop is basically the same as randomly gaining a free evolution point. Most of the time you play a 6-drop and you evolve it, but if you gain Rush on a 5/6 body, you probably won't even have to. On the other hand, gaining Bane or Ward is pretty useless. If you don't get Rush on this, you're going to have to evolve it, and a 7/8 is going to trade into pretty much anything favorably anyways. It's not going to even use the Bane. And likewise, Ward on a vanilla 6-drop is most likely just going to eat a hard removal. So this card has a 33% chance of being really good, and a 66% chance of being slightly better than a vanilla follower. Probably not good enough to see play considering there are more consistent 6-drops for Swordcraft. Overall, -1. Next, Shrouded Assassin, 4 mana 2/3, Ambush, Bane. It's a little weak on the stats, but it can be a proactive defensive play. You can play this against nothing, and then your opponent will have to play around it. Alternatively, ambush followers are pretty good buff targets, so you can also switch gears and make this an aggressive play if you have to. Overall, not too bad for a control style deck, so it gets a score of 0. Next, Luminous Standard, 3 mana Amulet. Whenever an allied commander comes into play, give it +1/+1. So this is the final confirmation that Cygames is pushing a commander deck for Swordcraft, along with Support Cannon and Gawain. And even though a number of commanders do require officers to be good, there are plenty of commanders that don't require officers to be good. Who knows, maybe a commander deck will come about, and maybe this card will be a staple in it. But in my opinion, I don't see that happening, so overall -1. On to neutrals. The last card in the entire set, Earthshock Ogre, 8 mana 6/6. Fanfare, deal 3 damage to an enemy. Evolve, deal 3 damage to an enemy. So assuming you even have an evolve point left on turn 8, this does give you some pretty flexible damage distribution. You can deal 3 damage to one thing, deal 3 damage to another thing, deal 6 damage to a third thing, or combine those values however you want. But first of all, you need an evolution point. Second of all, normal decks have a lot better options for 8 mana. And even if you're running a neutral craft deck, you're probably just going to run Odin if you want 8 mana removal. This card just pays way too many stats for an effect that's only significantly useful if you have an evolve point in the late game. Overall, -2. So that is all for now. I will most likely do some sort of write-up looking at each class as a whole and a potential meta after the expansion launches, and put it on Patreon like I did with the last expansion. I'll also be putting up a pack opening video as soon as the expansion launches, and hopefully some videos with new decks quickly after that. Feel free to discuss your opinions in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Please tune in again next time.